Welcome to the Sunday Forecast on the J-Spot, the place where we stimulate the most sensitive parts of your brain to get you ready for the week.
Happy Sunday. And a very significant Sunday at that.
It really is. Listeners, I hope you are comfortable. Maybe you've got that second cup of coffee in hand, or, maybe you're still in your pajamas, or perhaps you're already out for a long walk getting some fresh air. Whatever you're doing, welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
Because it is Sunday, March 8, 2026. And if you have looked at a calendar or a newspaper or pretty much any social media feed today, you know that means it's International Women's Day.
It is indeed. It's the day of, purple ribbons, corporate hashtags, and mimosa brunches. And look, before we dive into the sources today, there is absolutely a place for celebration. We should celebrate progress.
Right, definitely.
But looking at the stack of research we have on the desk for this deep dive, it paints a much grittier and frankly more interesting picture than just a polite celebration.
We are definitely going on a journey today. We aren't just looking at the surface level stuff. The mission of our deep dive today is to really dig into the roots of this day, which are way more radical than I realized, and honestly, a lot messier.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to look at what is happening literally right now globally in 2026. And then, because this is a Sunday forecast, we have to prep you for the week of March 9th through the 15th.
Which is going to be a busy one. Our source stack today includes a historical analysis of socialist feminism, the official 2026 UN women mandates, some really incredible on-the-ground reports from the Solomon Islands and Vanuatu, and
my personal favorite part of the stack.
Right, the psychological research. We've got some fascinating clinical studies on reverse seasonal affective disorder. So we'll get into why spring fever might actually be making you feel terrible and what you can actually do about it.
I feel seen by that already. But let's start with the history, because I think most of us have this vague idea of how International Women's Day started. If you asked me yesterday, I would have confidently said, wasn't it that strike in New York, the garment workers in 1857?
Which is the standard cocktail party answer.
Right.
It's the story you'll see on a lot of infographics today. The narrative usually goes that on March 8, 1857, textile workers in New York City marched for better wages and working conditions, were brutalized by police, and then 50 years later, the holiday was established to honor them.
It's a powerful story.
It is. It connects us to American labor history. It feels very clean.
It feels almost like a movie script. But based on the notes we pulled here, specifically the analysis from historian Tema Kaplan, that story is it just a complete lie?
I mean, lie implies malice, but myth is probably the accurate term. Kaplan's research suggests this 1857 legend actually popped up much later, in the 1950s. And the reason isn't accidental. It's deeply political. You have to remember the global context of the 1950s. We are right in the thick of the Cold War.
All right, East versus West.
Exactly. And at that time, International Women's Day was heavily associated with Soviet Russia and socialism. It was a massive state holiday behind the Iron Curtain. So in the West, there was this strong desire to detach the holiday from its Soviet history and give it a purely American origin story, something more spontaneous and something less Bolshevik.
So they essentially rebranded the holiday's origin to make it palatable for a Western audience that was terrified of communism.
Precisely. They needed a narrative that celebrated women without inadvertently celebrating socialist revolution.
That is wild. It's historical marketing at its absolute finest. So if the 1857 strike is a myth, let's unpack the real deal for everyone listening. Where did this actually come from? Because obviously it wasn't just pulled out of thin air.
No, it wasn't. It is still deeply rooted in labor, but it's much more explicitly political than the myth suggests. The first National Women's Day was actually held here in the U.S. in 1909, organized by the Socialist Party of America. But the idea to make it international came from a woman named Clara Zetkin.
Clara Zetkin. That is a name that should probably be as famous as Susan B. Anthony, but it just isn't.
No, it's really not. She was a German Marxist theorist and activist. In 1910, at a conference in Copenhagen, she proposed that working women around the world should set aside one specific day every year to press for their demands. But here is the nuance. She didn't pick a date. It was just a general idea for a day.
Okay, so when did March 8th become the actual date? Because that seems very specific to just land on randomly.
This is where we have to talk about 1917. And this is the part of the history that often gets completely glossed over today because it is inextricably linked to the Russian Revolution.
Okay, set the scene for us. This is definitely not a corporate brunch in Manhattan.
Far from it. It is Russia, 1917. The country is absolutely exhausted by World War I. Millions of men are dead at the front. People are starving in the cities. And on the last Sunday in February, which Side note, on the Julian calendar used in Russia at the time was February 23rd, but on the Gregorian calendar used in the West was March 8th. Women in Petrograd poured into the streets.
And they weren't just marching for voting rights, right? I read in the source they were marching for bread and peace.
Yes, it was a strike for pure survival. And what's incredible here is that the male revolutionary leaders, the Bolsheviks, actually thought the time wasn't right. They advised against the strike.
Wow.
Yeah, they thought it was premature and would just lead to a massacre by the military, but the women went anyway.
I love that detail so much. The men said, wait, and the women basically said, we are starving, we are going right now.
Exactly. They went from the bread lines directly to the factories, throwing snowballs at the windows, calling the male workers out to join them. By the end of that day, tens of thousands of people were on strike.
And this wasn't just a small protest that fizzled out by dinner time. This literally snowballed into the collapse of an empire.
It did. Within days, the Tsar was forced to abdicate. The Romanov dynasty ended. And, this is the real kicker, the provisional government that took over became the first major power to grant women the right to vote. This happened years before the U.S. or the U.K. followed suit.
Because of those women in the streets. So when we look at March 8th today, we really have to remember its DNA isn't just about passive celebration. It's about working class women, labor strikes, and the sheer power to topple empires just to put food on the table.
It creates a very different vibe than a pastel-colored hashtag, doesn't it? It reminds us that rights are usually taken, they are rarely just given.
It really does. It reframes the whole day for me. So let's fast forward 109 years. It is Sunday, March 8th, 2026. We obviously aren't in Petrograd. What is the vibe now? What are the themes driving the conversation for our listeners today?
Well, looking at the global landscape for 2026, we actually have a dual theme happening. On the official institutional side, UN Women has set their heavy hitter theme as rights, justice,
action. Justice, action. I mean, it sounds strong, but honestly, it also sounds a bit like standard UN bureaucratic language. What does it actually mean in practice?
It's focusing heavily on legal frameworks. The main insight from the source material is addressing the massive gap between having rights on paper and having actual access to justice in reality. We're talking about eliminating discriminatory laws that incredibly still exist in 2026.
Yeah.
Laws about inheritance, property ownership, divorce, and ensuring that when rights are violated, there is actually a judicial system that responds. It's moving from just building awareness to actual enforcement.
Okay, that makes sense. It's the difference between having a law against theft and actually having a police force that investigates it when your house gets robbed.
Exactly.
And then parallel to that UN theme, we have this broader, more community-facing campaign theme for 2026, which is give to gain.
Yes, give to gain.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Give to gain sounds a little bit transactional. Like, I will support women if I get something out of it. Is that the intent there?
It's a fair critique, but the literature suggests it's actually trying to flip the script on the zero-sum game mentality. The idea isn't a personal transaction. It's about reciprocity and collective benefit. The argument is that when we give support, resources, or visibility to women, we don't lose anything as a society. Society collectively gains. It's really trying to dismantle that lingering fear that women's rights somehow mean men's loss.
Ah, got it. So it's about the return on investment of equality for literally everyone.
Exactly. And that is crucial because despite the Sunday date, we are expecting massive protests globally today. The sources highlight that the core issues are incredibly persistent. In the U.S., women are still earning just 82 cents to the dollar. We're seeing huge mobilization around reproductive rights and gender-based violence.
And the safety aspect of those protests is something we can't ignore. The sources make this really chilling distinction between where we are sitting right now, able to broadcast and talk freely, and other parts of the world.
That is a critical point to bring up. In places like Toronto, Sydney, or Berlin, you'll see fully sanctioned marches today. Police will likely block traffic to let the crowds pass safely. But in authoritarian regimes, the sources specifically mention Iran, Turkey, and Russia, activism looks very different right now. It is dangerous. It's forced underground. It looks like releasing balloons as a symbolic act because holding a cardboard sign could literally get you arrested or worse.
It just reminds us that rights aren't distributed equally at all. Which brings us to a term that pops up a lot in our reading for this deep dive, which is intersectional feminism.
Right. This is a concept that has been around for decades, rooted in the incredible work of Black feminists like the Combahee River Collective and scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw, but it is absolutely front and center in the 2026 discourse.
So let's unpack this for the listener who hears the word intersectionality and just thinks it's academic buzzword soup. Why does this matter for the average person going about their week?
Simply put, it's the understanding that you cannot look at gender in a vacuum. A woman isn't just a woman. She might be a black woman, a poor woman, a disabled woman, a woman living in a rural conflict zone. All those identities overlap or intersect to create highly unique forms of oppression.
So if your version of feminism only addresses the problems of a wealthy white woman in a major city, say fighting the wage gap in corporate law, you aren't actually solving any problems for the woman in the rural conflict zone.
Precisely. The Combahee River Collective put it perfectly years ago. If you liberate the most oppressed people, you liberate everyone, because their freedom requires the destruction of all systems of oppression. If you fix the system for the most vulnerable, the system gets better for everyone.
That is the perfect segue into our next segment. Because give to gain and intersectionality can feel very theoretical when we just talk about them in a studio. But we pull some incredible stories from the field, specifically reports from the Pacific Islands, that show exactly what this looks like on the ground right now in 2026.
These examples are great because they move us completely from policy to actual people.
Let's talk about Joy Frank. She's in the Solomon Islands. She is a market vendor at Auki Market. Now, visualize this market for a second. For a long time, the women there were just selling produce, often sitting right in the mud, dealing with terrible sanitation, and paying arbitrary fees to the local council without even getting a receipt.
It was pure survival mode. But through a program called Markets for Change, which is supported by UN Women, Joy didn't just learn how to handle food better or do basic accounting.
She became a negotiator, and according to the reports, that is the key shift.
Right. She says in the source, quote, "Just by practicing proper food handling, my sales have increased," end quote. But more than that, she actually negotiated better fees with the council. She got the sanitation improved. She organized the other women in the market.
What stands out to me there is the economic empowerment piece. It wasn't a handout. It was practical training that allowed her to structuralize her business. She gained agency. And when she gains agency, the market becomes safer and cleaner for everyone who shops there. That is literally give to gain.
Exactly. And then there is the story of Leslie David in Vanuatu. This one really illustrates the disaster resilience aspect of gender equality, which is a huge part of the 2026 conversation.
Leslie used a solar energy loan to buy a freezer, a solar-powered freezer.
Which sounds like a nice luxury, right? Until you look at the context of the Pacific Islands, which are highly prone to severe climate disasters.
Exactly. At first you think, okay, nice, she can keep her fish coals and sell it later. But then a disaster hit, an earthquake, I believe, followed by complete grid failure. The power grid goes out for the entire area. But Leslie has this solar setup.
And suddenly, her home becomes the core resilience hub for the entire village.
Yes. The report notes, people are running to her house to charge their phones so they can contact their families to say they are safe. They are bringing their perishable meat to put in her freezer so it doesn't spoil and they don't starve.
That is the give to gain principle in high definition. Empowering one woman, Leslie, didn't just help Leslie. It created a vital safety net for her entire community during a life or death crisis.
It's the ripple effect. You give a woman a solar panel and you gain a resilient village.
And connecting back to that intersectional point we just discussed, these programs worked because they addressed the specific needs of rural, island-based women who are on the absolute front lines of climate change. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution handed down from a boardroom in New York. It was specific to their unique intersection of geography, class, and gender.
Speaking of New York, let's look at the week ahead for our listeners. Because today is Sunday the 8th, but tomorrow, Monday the 9th, things get very busy at the UN.
That's right. Monday marks the official start of CSW 70. That's the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. It is arguably the biggest annual gathering on gender equality in the world.
And the delegates there are laser-focused on that justice theme we mentioned earlier in the broadcast.
They are looking specifically at access to justice for all women and girls. So as you go about your week, expect to see a lot of headlines about legal reform, police accountability, and how judicial systems currently fail survivors of violence. If you see those headlines, know that they're coming directly out of these major discussions in New York.
But for those of us listening who aren't delegates at the UN, how do we actually apply this give-to-gain mindset to our actual lives this week? We dug into the official toolkit provided in the source material, and there's some really solid practical actions.
There really are. One that jumped out at me for the corporate listener If you're at work this week, take a hard look at who you are sponsoring. Not just mentoring, but sponsoring.
Let's clarify the distinction there.
Yeah.
Because I think people use those terms interchangeably all the time.
They do, but they are very different. Mentoring is giving advice to someone. It's talking to them. Sponsoring is talking about someone when they aren't in the room. It's using your own political capital to advocate for them for a promotion or a high-visibility project. Give to gain means actually spending that capital to pull someone else up.
I love that distinction. Another really practical tip from the toolkit is just to give credit. It sounds so small, but studies consistently show women's ideas are often co-opted or completely overlooked in meetings. Simply saying, hey, that was Sarah's point and it's a great one, is an act of giving that fundamentally changes the office culture.
And on the broader organizational level, push for pay audits. You cannot fix the 82-cent gap if you don't even know it exists in your own company. Transparency is always the first step to justice.
On the personal front, the toolkit suggests donating to legal defense funds, which ties right back to that UN justice theme, or simply challenging stereotypes when you hear them at the dinner table or out with friends.
I really love the quote from Dechan Choki, an activist in Australia mentioned in the IWD materials. She said, quote, "I choose to give with purpose, knowing true growth is shared growth."
True growth is shared growth. That is a fantastic mantra for the week.
It really is. And I feel like we need to take a collective breath here.
Yes, the breath. Because while we're talking about revolution and action and high-energy advocacy, I'm looking at the calendar, and it is March.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I am tired, and I suspect a lot of our listeners are feeling it too.
You are definitely not alone. And this brings us to our final segment today, the mental health check-in, because there is a very real documented phenomenon that happens right around this exact time of year.
We call it the spring paradox. We are constantly told that spring is coming, the birds are chirping, the days are getting longer, and we should be full of vibrant energy. But the data says a lot of us actually feel worse.
It's clinically known as reverse SAD, or reverse seasonal affective disorder. We usually think of winter causing depression due to a lack of light, but for about 10% of people with seasonal patterns, the onset of spring is actually the trigger. And even for those without a clinical diagnosis, this transition period is notoriously rocky.
Why is that? Is it just that we secretly ate the sun?
Not exactly. It's deeply biological. The first hidden culprit is actually allergies.
Allergies? Wait, how does a runny nose make me depressed?
It's way more than a runny nose. The psychological research we pulled points to clinical studies showing that high pollen counts trigger the release of inflammatory cytokines. These are proteins that naturally regulate the immune system. But here's the kicker. They can actually cross the blood-brain barrier.
And do what once they get in there?
They directly affect the mood-regulating regions of the brain. So the pollen is literally creating physical inflammation in your brain, which can manifest as anxiety, foggy thinking, and severe lethargy.
That is wild to me. So when I feel totally foggy and unmotivated in March, it might literally be the trees outside attacking my brain chemistry.
Essentially, yes. And then on top of the cytokines, you have the circadian rhythm disruption. The light is changing rapidly every day right now. We are staring down the barrel of daylight saving time. That shift in light can severely destabilize your sleep architecture, and sleep is a massive mood regulator.
I noticed the clinical notes mentioned specific severe risks for people with bipolar disorder during this time.
Yes, that is a critical point we have to make. For people with bipolar disorder, this time of year is actually a high-risk period for mania. The rapidly increasing daylight can dangerously overstimulate the nervous system. It's not just getting happier, it's becoming chronically destabilized.
And then on top of the biology, there is the social pressure, the relentless, look how nice it is outside, pressure from everyone around you.
Right. If you feel tired or down because of those cytokines or sleep shifts, but the rest of the world is screaming that it's a lovely day, that disconnect creates an immense amount of internalized shame. You feel like you're somehow failing at spring.
So how do we functionally spring clean our mental health this week without completely burning out?
Yeah.
Because I had this sudden urge to deep clean my entire house, but I absolutely do not have the physical energy to do it.
The Cleveland Clinic source we reviewed had some great, highly practical advice. First, sleep hygiene. Don't just wait for the time change to hit you like a truck. Start adjusting your bedtime by 15 to 30 minutes gradually, starting right now. Ease your brain into it.
And for the cleaning part, because the urge to purge is very real right now, don't try to do the whole house. The advice is so simple. Do one shelf.
Just one shelf. It builds momentum. It gives you a tangible sense of control over your immediate environment, which actively reduces anxiety, but it doesn't overwhelm your nervous system.
And my absolute favorite piece of advice from the psychological research, you don't owe anyone performative wellness.
That is the one to write on a Post-it and stick on the fridge. If you need rest, rest. The plants outside are blooming right now, yes, but they also spent the entire winter dormant. You are allowed to transition into this new season at your own pace.
I really love that. So let's bring this all together for everyone listening. It is March 8, 2026. We are standing on the shoulders of those incredibly radical women in 1917 who demanded bread and peace.
We are looking ahead at a week where the world fights for concrete justice and rights at the UN in New York.
We are seeing women like Leslie in Vanuatu actively turning sunlight into safety and resilience for their entire villages.
And we are reminding ourselves that giving to gain also means giving ourselves a little bit of grace as our bodies violently adjust to the changing season.
It's a lot to hold, but it is all connected. It's all about creating an environment where we can actually thrive rather than just survive.
You know, if I could leave the listener with one final provocative thought to mull over this week, it's this concept of intersectional autonomy that came up in the legal journals we reviewed for today.
Go on. What does that mean for us?
We talk a lot about having rights on paper, but true autonomy is the real-world ability to make decisions about your own life. Whether you are sitting in a corporate boardroom, standing in a voting booth, or selling produce at a market in the Solomon Islands, real freedom isn't just a law written down somewhere. It's the actual power to say yes or no to the things that affect you. So as you go into this week, look around and ask yourself, are we creating spaces where everyone has that autonomy, not just the people who look like us?
That is definitely the question to chew on this week. Happy International Women's Day, everyone. Take care of each other, and please take care of your brains.
See you next week.
The J Spot is a Jay Briar Allen production, edited by Jay Rivera, Danielle Reyes, and Jessica Garcia.